Everyone is celebrating the RBA's rate cut like it's Christmas morning. The media is calling it the relief for home buyers. But what if I told you that these rate cuts could actually push your dream home further out of reach? This sounds backwards, right? But that's because no one is actually telling you what's really happening when the rate drops. By the end of this video today, you'll see the Australian housing market completely differently, and let me show you the real data that they are not sharing today. Look, I get it when people think that rate cuts means relief. The logic is really simple. The lower interest rates equals cheaper mortgages, which equals easier home buying. Your monthly repayments drop by $100, maybe $200, and finally some breathing room. That's what the headline would usually say. That's what your mates at the barbecue would probably think. That's what your parents are telling you, to wait for this. But here is what they are not telling you. Those same rate cuts that can save you $150 a month, they are simultaneously adding $20,000 to $30,000 to what you can borrow. This isn't a theory. This isn't me guessing. This isn't me playing the smart one. This is proven over and over again in Australian property history. Let me take you back to 2020. Do you remember 2020? The RBA slashed rates to emergency low of 0.1%, the lowest in Australian history. Everyone said that this is us helping the first-home buyers finally getting into the market. We all know what happened instead. Property prices exploded. Sydney house prices jumped to 20% in some areas. Melbourne wasn't far behind. People who've been saving for years watched the homes shoot up in prices faster than they could save. And I remember that time because I was the first one buying the property. That was the first time I bought a property for myself. So let that sink in. Double the growth every time the rate cuts happen. Meanwhile, the first home buyers kept being pushed further and further out. Each time the finish line moved, each time the goalpost changed. And here's the thing that most people miss. Affordability actually didn't improve, not even once, not even in any of these cycles. It stayed flat or actually got worse, because when you make debt cheaper, you don't make houses cheaper. You just give people more ammunition to compete for the same limited supply of homes. It's basically economics 101. When you increase demand without increasing the supply, prices are actually going to go up, not down. You're getting into an era where first home buyers won't exist anymore, unfortunately. Houses will be transferred over generational wealth, which means whether your kids have a poor or a comfortable retirement is up to you now. All right, let's get really specific here, because this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where most people get blindsided. This is what the blind spot is for majority of you guys. When RBA rate cuts happens, let's say just by 0.25%, that's just 1/4%. Here's what happens to the borrowing capacity overnight. If you're a single average earner in Australia, you can suddenly borrow an extra $12,000. If you're a couple both earning average wages, that jumps to almost $23,000. Now here it gets really interesting. Multiply that by every buyer in the market, every first home buyer, every upgrader, every investor, every single person got the same amount of borrowing capacity boost. These rate cuts benefits investors even more than the first home buyers. Why? Because investors can leverage equity from properties that they already own. But here's the actual problem, the elephant in the room, that politicians and media commentators don't want you to talk about because it's way too hard to fix: supply. Australia has a massive housing shortage, and I mean massive. We need to build 223,000 new homes every year just to keep up with the demand. Now the rental vacancies rate tell the same story. They are at the record low at around 1.4% nationally. That's less than half of what was considered a balanced market. In Adelaide, 0.9%. In Perth, 1.1%. Hobart, 1.2%. In Melbourne, just 1.4%. These aren't just numbers. These are families, young professionals, couples who literally cannot find a place to rent. Let's talk about the numbers that should terrify anyone trying to buy their first home right now. Domain's research actually found that property prices are currently rising 8.5% per year. Meanwhile, wages are only growing by about 3.4%. Now, when rate cut kicks in, here is what CoreLogic found out. For every 1% drop in interest rate leads to 6.1% increase in property values. AMP Capital, Shane Oliver put it perfectly. He said, rate cuts will drive prices from a point of still poor affordability. Translation, we are starting from a place where houses are already too expensive for most people, and rate cuts are about to make them even more expensive. And here is what the major analysts are predicting for 2025, 2026 when rate cuts really kick in. Sydney's median house price is hitting 1.8 million. That's up by 7%. Melbourne would rise to about 1.11 million, rising up by between 6 to 7%. Brisbane jumping up to 1.09 million, up by 5%. And Perth and Adelaide are already seeing double-digit growth. And remember, the national median house price right now sits at around $929,000. That's for houses only. We are not even considering units here. That's not just the market. So who actually benefits from all of this chaos? Because sometimes someone needs to be a winner here, right? But they're not the first-time buyers. The people who win from these rate cuts are existing homeowners who have refinanced and saved money on their mortgages, property investors, who can leverage equity to buy more properties, and anyone who is already in the market who watches their net worth climb. Meanwhile, if you're on the outside looking inside, these rate cuts just moved the finish line further away for you. I had a client back in 2021, a young couple working full-time, saving hard, did everything right. They thought that they were being smart, waiting for the prices to cool down after rate cuts were announced. 6 months later, the same townhouse that they were eyeing for went for from $650,000 to $770,000. That's $120,000 in 6 months. They would have needed another 3 years of saving at their rate cut just to catch up to the price increase. And by then, it would have gone up again. They didn't fail because they were not looking hard enough, or they didn't fail because they were bad with money. They failed because they followed the conventional wisdom. They waited for the right time. And here's the most frustrating part. So whether you're renting or trying to buy, rate cuts aren't solving your problems. They are just amplifying it. So what do you actually do with this information? Basically, I'm not here to just complain. I'm here to help you navigate through some of these things. So first, stop waiting for some magical moment, where RBA saves you. It's not coming. There is no cavalry that is waiting across the hill for you. Here's what the top 10% of the investors do. They don't try to time interest rates. They time the markets. They look for one suburb with genuine supply shortage, not just low vacancy rates, but places where new construction is coming in, but it's limited by geography, zoning, or infrastructure. Number two, the location where rental yields are climbing faster than the market average. This tells you that demand is outstripping supply at local level. And number three, markets with strong fundamentals before everyone else catches on. We're talking about employment growth, population growth, lifestyle factors, gentrification, mortgage stress. Because here is the truth. If you know rate cuts are coming, you need to position yourself before the herd moves. The next boom isn't going to reward people who waited for that perfect condition. It's going to reward people who are prepared while everyone is playing the waiting game on the sidelines. That doesn't mean, rush blindly, or, it doesn't mean, buy anything or anywhere. It means being strategic, get educated, understand the fundamentals, and look. If you are a first home buyer, I'm not saying give up. I'm just saying adjust your strategy. Maybe that means looking at suburbs further out where supply is better, considering a unit or a townhouse instead of, houses, partnering with the family if possible to boost your deposit. And I'm not going to, sugarcoat things. Australian property market is really tough right now. Probably the toughest it's been in generations for first home buyers. Rate cuts might sound like a good news on surface. The media will celebrate it and the politicians will, take a big credit for them. But for most people trying to buy their first home, they're just moving the goalposts further and further away. The problem isn't the cost of money, it's the lack of homes. You can't fix a supply crisis with cheaper debt. It's like, trying to solve traffic congestions by making cars go faster, instead of building more roads. You're not solving the problem, you're making it worse. So stop waiting for someone else to fix this for you. Stop waiting for that perfect time. Take control of your own strategy, learn how the market actually works, not how the headline says it works. I'm Mohsin Reza, and I help Australians cut through the noise and build real wealth through property. If that is what you're after, and if you want to stop being a victim of the market and start being a player in it, subscribe to the channel. I release video every week breaking down what's really happening in Australian property market with data, with strategy, with real numbers, with no BS. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and let's keep this conversation going, because the next 12 months are going to be critical. And I want to make sure you are on the right side of what's coming. Take care, keep smiling, keep investing. This is Mosh checking out. Adios.